August 1945. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 200,000 people were killed instantly or succumbed to the slow poison of radiation over the next few months. With the Soviet Union declaring war and America threatening to unleash this new but terrible weapon on even more Japanese cities, Imperial Japan surrenders. At last, World War II is over. Over 80 years later, history remembers the names of the countries and people who made this terrible but war-winning weapon possible. Oppenheimer, Groves, Einstein, the United States, Canada, Great Britain. In his memoirs, Winston Churchill would later praise Canada for its contribution to the atomic bomb, saying, "The Canadian government, whose contribution was most valuable, provided both indispensable raw material for the project as a whole and also necessary facilities for the work on one section of the project." That last bit, though, wasn't the full truth. You see, over 80% of the uranium that fueled the Manhattan Project did not come from the mines of North America. It came from a single, remote hole in the red earth of the Belgian Congo, now known as the DRC, a place called Shinkolobwe. This is the story of Shinkolobwe and its contribution to the atomic age. But before we go on, please like, share, and subscribe. Shinkolobwe Mine's story begins in 1915 when it was officially opened. Shinkolobwe belonged to the Union Minier du Haut-Katanga. Union Minier was a giant Belgian corporate titan that had almost exclusive control over the Belgian Congo's extensive mineral resources. Originally, Shinkolobwe was opened for one simple thing: to extract radium. Back then, radium was a miracle element used in cancer treatments and glow-in-the-dark watches. And, as funny as it sounds, it was the most expensive mineral in the world. You see, radium was rare. To get it, miners at Shinkolobwe had to dig through massive amounts of a heavy black mineral called pitchblende. To the Belgians and every other miner back then, pitchblende was just waste. Pitchblende, or uranium ore as we now call it, was trash. At Shinkolobwe, it was simply piled into a large heap and then promptly forgotten about. Shinkolobwe Mine churned out radium in this waste uranium ore until 1937. The mine was closed in 1937 because it was no longer profitable. The price of radium had collapsed and it didn't make any financial sense to continue digging for it. A year later, in 1938, a huge scientific breakthrough occurred at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Physics in Nazi Germany. German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann successfully split the uranium atom. Scientists Lise Meitner and Leo Szilard realized something terrifying. The uranium atom splitting process could keep repeating and grow out of control, potentially creating an incredibly powerful weapon. They immediately realized that it would only be a matter of time before Nazi Germany figured this out and embarked on building such a weapon. In August 1939, together with Albert Einstein, they wrote a letter to the US President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In the letter, Einstein warned the president of this possibility. He urged the United States to secure a stable supply of uranium. Einstein told Roosevelt that the United States has only very poor ores of uranium and in moderate amounts. The best place to get uranium was in the Belgian Congo, at a remote, abandoned mine called Shinkolobwe. With that one experiment, uranium went from being a useless metal to a special one. The waste uranium ore at Shinkolobwe was even more special. You see, Shinkolobwe was a freak of nature. Its ore had a purity of 65 to 80%. Most uranium sources in the world had a purity less than 1%. They were considered good enough to mine if they had a purity of 0.03%. Just think about that. With purity levels that high, Shinkolobwe's ore was significantly easier to refine and process. In response to Einstein's letter, President Roosevelt formed an advisory committee on uranium led by Lyman J. Briggs. After finding out that the Nazis had started an extensive atomic research program, the committee pushed for a similar program in the US. Things became even more urgent in June 1940 when Nazi Germany defeated and occupied Belgium. The Atomic Committee convinced Union Mine's director, Edgar Sanger, to move the company's large reserves of uranium ore to warehouses in the United States. The reason for this was simple. The US feared that Nazi Germany would soon force the Belgian colonial government in the Congo to switch its allegiance to it. And with that done, the Nazis would have control of Shinkolobwe and its precious uranium ore. From July 1940, the US and the Belgian colonial government in the Congo started moving the uranium ore from Shinkolobwe to the United States. The ore was shipped by rail to the port of Lobito in Portuguese Angola. From there, it was shipped across the Atlantic to warehouses in the US. By the end of 1940, 1,200 tons of the uranium ore from Shinkolobwe was safely in the United States. With the US now officially at war with both Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, the US finally started the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project's aim was very simple: to develop an atomic bomb. In September 1942, Roosevelt formally appointed General Leslie Groves to head the military side of the project. Henry L. Stimson, who was the Secretary of War at the time, was to head the civilian side of the program. The very first act of this new team was to buy the stockpiled uranium ore from Union Mine. But the stockpile wasn't enough. It soon became clear to everyone involved in the top-secret Manhattan Project that Shinkolobwe simply had to be reopened. The US government poured in money and engineers to get Shinkolobwe back online. The railheads were repaired and Shinkolobwe, which had been flooded due to disuse, was drained of water. By 1943, Shinkolobwe was back online. However, it would only reach maximum production output in March 1945. The route for shipping the uranium ore from the Belgian Congo to the United States was also changed. The ore would now move from Shinkolobwe to the railhead at Port Franqui, now known as Ilebo. From there, it would be floated down the Kasai and Congo rivers by barge to Leopoldville, now known as Kinshasa. And from Leopoldville, it would move by rail to the port of Matadi. And from Matadi, it would be shipped across a U-boat-infested Atlantic to the United States. So the reason for changing the transport route was simple. You see, Portuguese Angola was teeming with Nazi spies. And with the Americans suspected one thing: that Nazi spies wanted the same rich uranium ore that America was digging up at Shinkolobwe. The Belgian Congo was a somewhat divided colony during those dark days of World War II. The colonial government sided with the Allies and the Belgian government in exile after Belgium's defeat and occupation by the Nazis. However, a sizable chunk of very influential white Belgians in the colony were pro-Nazi. Smuggling rings existed within the pro-Nazi community. These rings smuggled precious minerals like industrial diamonds and copper to Nazi Germany. The last thing the United States wanted was for them to start smuggling uranium ore from Shinkolobwe. The United States sent in undercover OSS agents to the Belgian Congo. The mission of the agents was simple. Their job was to protect Shinkolobwe's uranium ore on its way to the United States. Just as importantly, they had to prevent any of it being smuggled to Nazi Germany. Against great and many odds, they succeeded in their mission. Throughout 1942, 1943, 1944, and 1945, scientists involved in the Manhattan Project raced to develop a nuclear bomb before Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan got one. After years of hard work, they finally succeeded. Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945, but Imperial Japan refused to budge. Across the brutal battlefields of the Pacific, Japanese soldiers fought ferociously, to the death, and with them died thousands of American and Allied soldiers. Now armed with powerful atomic weapons, the US decided to use them and force Japan to surrender, just like Nazi Germany had. With Hiroshima and Nagasaki obliterated, Imperial Japan was finally forced to surrender. For a short while, it looked like peace might come to the world, but it simply wasn't to be. After the devastation of World War II, many people expected a lasting peace of sorts. Instead, a new kind of conflict emerged. The world became increasingly divided between two powerful blocs, the capitalist bloc led by the United States and the communist one led by the Soviet Union. While their opposing ideologies played a role, deeper tensions over security, influence, and control quickly eroded any sense of friendship that had existed in the Second World War. By the late 1940s, the Cold War was officially on. After the whole Nagasaki and Hiroshima business, the United States understood one thing: that the other great powers, especially the Soviet Union, would develop their own nuclear weapons. The Americans believed that it would take the Soviets at least 10 years to get the bomb. They were wrong. The Soviets got the bomb in 1949, thanks to their spies in America's nuclear program. Shinkolobwe, with its rich uranium ore, now found itself right at the center of America's atomic weapons program. Throughout the 1940s, Shinkolobwe continued to churn out uranium ore. Most of this ore was stored, some of it was transferred to the UK for its own atomic weapons program, and some was used to build more nuclear weapons for the United States. On average, Shinkolobwe was producing about 400 tons of uranium ore per month and shipping it to the US and the UK. As much as 90% of the uranium ore used in the US atomic weapons program came from Shinkolobwe alone. Meanwhile, far away from Shinkolobwe, the Cold War was getting serious. In 1949, Mao's communists seized control of mainland China. Also in the same year, the Soviet Union conducted its first nuclear test. And just 1 year later, the Korean War broke out. The Cold War was now something not to take lightly. In 1950, the Americans launched an ambitious atomic weapons building program. Throughout the mid to late 1940s, the ore at Shinkolobwe had been mostly stockpiled. Now, the US would start manufacturing nuclear weapons on an industrial scale. Even as far back as 1945, the US was already obsessed with keeping Shinkolobwe secure. As the Cold War became more serious, this obsession grew. To do this, they created a two-tiered security system. The first was meant to defend the Belgian Congo against the Soviets in the event of another hot war. The center of this plan was the massive Kamina Air Base. Located about 320 kilometers from Shinkolobwe, Kamina was a 100,000-acre NATO fortress. It had a long runway which could handle the West's most advanced jet aircraft. If the Atlantic was ever cut off, Kamina would provide an air bridge to the US itself. The second tier was designed to handle internal threats to the mine, disaffected black Congolese miners, and Soviet agents. To enforce this, the location of the mine was removed from maps. A 10-mile exclusion zone was formed around the mine. No unauthorized personnel were allowed in this zone, which was heavily patrolled by soldiers from the Force Publique, Belgium's Congolese colonial army. These troops were stationed in a massive garrison at nearby Jadotville, built with money provided by the Americans. According to a local newspaper, these troops had a shoot-on-sight policy for anyone found within that forbidden zone. But beyond the zone itself, the CIA had numerous spies and informants in nearby towns, such as Jadotville, to keep tabs on any white foreigners lurking in the area. One Italian journalist would observe in 1954 that it is impossible for a white man to move about unobserved in Shinkolobwe, and for someone to gate-crash the mining zone without the police's knowledge immediately puts the Union Minier in a state of alarm. So, as the 1950s rolled on, it became clear that Shinkolobwe alone wouldn't be able to handle America's demand. You see, the US atomic program at the time demanded about 9,150 tons of uranium ore per year, and Shinkolobwe simply couldn't keep up. After over a decade of round-the-clock mining, Shinkolobwe was starting to get depleted. The miners had to dig deeper and deeper into the ground to get the uranium out. Significant advances in technology also meant that even low-grade uranium could now be processed easily. Soon, the Americans started looking for alternatives. And as they found more and more of them, Shinkolobwe started to lose its importance. By the late 1950s, another threat emerged to Shinkolobwe. The Congo was fast heading for independence. From the looks of it, Patrice Lumumba would likely be president. Asked by a group of businessmen in New York if the US would still have access to the uranium once the Congo became independent, as it had during the Belgian days, Lumumba said, "Belgium doesn't produce any uranium. It would be to the advantage of both our countries if the Congo and the US worked out their own agreements in the future." That response was not enough for the US government and Union Minier. In their minds, Lumumba was likely to hand Shinkolobwe over to the Soviets. Just before independence in 1960, Shinkolobwe Mine was officially closed. To make sure that it would be unusable, the Belgians poured concrete into Shinkolobwe's 300-meter deep mine shafts. Shinkolobwe's atomic age was over. From 1960 and onwards, Shinkolobwe was officially a closed and abandoned mine. However, that didn't mean much to the thousands of desperate artisanal miners. Between 1960 and 2004, Shinkolobwe became a lawless frontier. Driven by poverty and a hunger for cobalt, thousands of artisanal miners descended on its ruins. Soon, a makeshift shanty town sprang up around the area. The miners hand-carved tunnels into the radioactive earth, inhaling radioactive dust. Their families cooked and washed with contaminated water. But it wasn't just the miners watching who had an interest in Shinkolobwe. In the shadows of the post-9/11 world, the rumor mill began churning with terrifying reports. Rogue states like Iran, North Korea, and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda were now attempting to get a hold of some of Shinkolobwe's high-quality uranium ore. The United States and its allies moved swiftly. They put immense pressure on the Congolese government to act. In 2004, the government sent in the army to forcibly clear the site. A presidential decree was soon issued which strictly forbade anyone near being the site for any reason at all. But the Congolese government had another reason to close down Shinkolobwe. That reason was much more health-related. To understand these health-related reasons, you have to understand the darker side of Shinkolobwe's history. You see, mining at Shinkolobwe was reckless, systematically reckless. In the 1940s, black mine workers worked under brutal conditions, including low pay. When the black miners striked over this in 1941, the governor of Katanga personally shot and killed Leonard Mboyi, the strike leader. He then ordered the force publique to shoot and break up the strike. Over 70 miners died that day. The miners did get a modest pay rise, but their lot didn't improve much. The black miners continued to handle the radioactive uranium ore with their bare hands, while their white supervisors wore protective clothing. In one 2-week period in 1940, black miners working a long shift were subjected to more radiation in 2 weeks than they would in 1 year in natural circumstances. Things only got worse when the concentrator plant was built in 1950. The plant produced massive amounts of waste, known as tailings. Instead of being sealed, this radioactive sludge was dumped into the open. It soon leached into the soil and local rivers, contaminating them. The black miners who worked at Shinkolobwe from the 1940s to 1960, and those who arrived after 1960, were exposed to this toxic quagmire. The results were catastrophic. Doctors began documenting a chilling surge in blue babies, infants born with severe heart defects. Babies with missing limbs and other severe deformities became common in those people who had been unfortunate enough to come across Shinkolobwe. Amongst adults and former miners, different types of cancers exploded. Miners who had worked there in the 1940s, and those who had done so post-1960, died from a wide array of cancers. Leukemia, lung cancer, kidney cancer, pancreatic cancer, and even chronic kidney failure took the lives of many of these men. Today, Shinkolobwe is nothing more than a contaminated ghost site. No one lives there, and no one dares go anywhere near it. Few people remember or even know its story. Only a few Western intelligence agencies and their spy satellites still have an interest in it. This is the story of Shinkolobwe. Please share, like, and subscribe for more deep dives into interesting African history topics.